Jargon busting. Over to you, Eileen.
Okay, so I'm unmuted, everybody. Everybody can hear me? Excellent. Do you know, I actually do this for a living, shouldn't I? So what I thought, we've got Steve Jenner, who we're going to talk to in a couple of minutes. But I just thought I would have a quick summary of the various portfolio management techs that are in and around the place. They've been around for a while. And there's various kind of qualifications. So I'm not going to kind of go into each into depth, but certainly kind of hopefully enough just to give you an insight into kind of the differences between them. So the one that is the oldest that is still current, if that makes sense, is that it is the 2011 one, which Steve Jenner was a contributor to, which was primarily led by Craig Kilford in the management of portfolio. So Stephen was heavily involved in that first one. It's still it's owned by Axelos. It is been around since 14 years. Can you believe it, Stephen? 14 years since that's been kind of published. And there's an examination via Axelos, or PeopleCert as it now is, if you wanted to do that. The second publication I'm just going to touch on is the PMI standard for portfolio management. Now, they originally brought out their very first one in 2006, so they're up to their fourth edition, which is now kind of was brought out in 2017. That also is linked to a certification of a project portfolio professional. And then the third book I'm just going to touch on is it's really interesting when they come up, when you kind of put these pictures up. It really is only a very thin booklet as opposed to a book. But APM did one on portfolio management. It's not got an accreditation, so it's quite a kind of an easy. And then the final one, which is we're going to talk to Steve about in a moment, is the one that was released last year. So not to be confused with management of portfolios. This is managing portfolios, very much like the managing benefits book, which was also written by Steve. So I just did a quick kind of flick through. If we go to the next slide, Lindsay, we're just going to go through what I look for was kind of the three definitions. When I first started out kind of doing project program management and training and what have you, there was lots of disagreement around what a portfolio was. Everybody had kind of slightly different wording. What's been really interesting is that everybody now kind of is almost there in terms of the same language. So I looked at portfolio management, and I also looked at a bit of kind of PMO just out of curiosity. So back to kind of the totality. It's not just talking about kind of projects and program, it's investment in change. And in 2011, we had a coordinated collection of strategic processes and decisions about that balance of organisation change and business as usual. Interestingly, at that point, although it talks about strategic processes, not a huge amount in terms of kind of the word strategy. In the book, it talks a lot more about that, but it's not actually there in the definition of portfolio management. And the PMO, obviously aligned to the rest of the Axelos products, talks about a P3O structure, which is a decision enabling and support business models. So that's where we were with the definitions. If we go on to the PMI one, again, you'll see there's a lot of kind of a similarity in the words, but we've already got this kind of subsidiary portfolios now. So you've got subsidiary portfolios in a portfolio. And I think we do talk about sometimes kind of breaking the portfolios down into several different portfolios. But this is where we've got kind of managed as a group to achieve strategic objectives, which you can argue kind of overlies a bit with a definition of a program. And their portfolio management is about the centralised management of those portfolios to achieve strategic objectives. So very much kind of focusing now on the kind of the strategy and having some kind of central way of doing that. And they talk about PMO for responsible for that kind of centralized management and coordination. So really interesting one in terms of kind of where it sees the PMO. The next one in terms of the APM, they have a collection of projects and programs, kind of really the typical and kind of management investments. And I'm going to come back onto that management investments with a question I'm going to ask Steve. And again, we're here optimizing strategic benefits or operational activity. And I would argue kind of operational activities there to drive strategy and to support strategy as well. Portfolio management, they've kind of just pulled out a couple of the activities in terms of the definition, selection, prioritization, and control in line with the strategic objectives and deliver. And they have, what was really interesting back in 2011, didn't have a definition of the PMO in the body of knowledge, but they did have one in the program management guide, which is an organizational structure that provides support for projects, programs, and portfolios, which is very much aligned to kind of where we sit with the House of PMO. And then finally, in terms of the final kind of managing portfolios guide, we've got, again, it kind of brings together all of the thinking. So it is about that investment, and it talks about it at kind of different levels now. So it's not just kind of at that organization level, but it's also at the functional level, again, about optimizing benefits and operational activity. Very similar in terms of the portfolio management. And what I found really interesting about the management portfolios, and we're going to have a conversation, Steve, about this. PMO is not defined in the glossary, though it is mentioned throughout and plays a key role in supporting delivery. But in the glossary, there is something called a value management office, which is about either a benefits realization office or a kind of strategic management office. Then finally, and I'm running out of time because I need to give Steve some talk, so we're going to just rattle through these. All I've got is just kind of some information there in terms of kind of the high level model. So from an Axelos perspective, we've got kind of 5 principles in that and supports this kind of, is it a helix driven by organizational energy, which looks at kind of
infinity symbol.
Pardon?
It was the infinity symbol.
Infinity symbol, that's right.
Yeah.
That looks at portfolio definition and portfolio delivery. Next one, in terms of the PMI one, interestingly, their kind of high level model is circular, but doesn't actually kind of contain anything that's kind of in there. So they've got 8 principles, which are just kind of lost in the text somewhere, but what they call 6 performance domains, and then this kind of circular portfolio life cycle. APM have got a very kind of simplified, and this is where you realize, and we've had this thing with doing the circle of resource management, having a good diagram speaks wonders, because that I would suggest is probably not the best diagram. But they have kind of 6 core processes that need to be undertaken through the portfolio management. What I do like about this, which I don't think is mentioned anything else, is this concept of a portfolio entry criteria. But more interesting for me is a portfolio exit criteria. So I quite like that. And then in Steve's model, and interestingly, Steve couldn't find this diagram anywhere on the interweb. I had to take a photograph out of the book, because I do have all of the textbooks. I had to take a photograph out of the book. So in the new version, or the kind of the new released book, Managing Portfolios, we have this concept of kind of 5 principles, which are executive engagement, strategic clarity, effective governance, setting up to succeed in collaborative culture, and I've mentioned those for a specific reason. And then you've got 6 practices around portfolio design and 6 practices around portfolio delivery. So very much kind of on a kind of a similar theme, but I think there's some kind of subtle differences between the 2, or between the 4 of them.